Good afternoon. Under the aegis of Indian Association of Cosmetic Dermatology and Gynecology and Aesthetic Health Committee of Indian Menopause Society, along with Indian Fertility Society Haryana chapter, Dr. Ragini Agarwal presents the third episode of Demystifying Human Sexuality, an ongoing series every fourth Thursday till this year end. On behalf of Jackson Paul Pharmaceuticals, I, Amit Saxena, along with my teammate Dr. Deepika Chhabra, we bring warm greetings to all. To improve the erectile function, Jackson Paul brings to you Lycorate soft gel. The Lycorate cell protector protects nitric oxide viability, preserves endothelial and mitochondrial structure integrity. The most trusted form of estrogen, micronized Endonorm EV2, Estradiol Valerate 2 mg and Endoreg 2 mg tablet of Dynogest for endometriosis. A warm welcome to the faculty and all attendees. Please post your queries by text in the Q&A box to be answered at the end. Please note this webinar is streaming live on Jackson Paul Facebook Live, and the link will be shared in the chat box now. The recording will remain on YouTube channel for reference and promotion. We welcome chairperson for today's program, Dr. Sonu Balhara Alawat, Secretary Haryana Chapter Indian Fertility Society, and Dr. Priya Vashne, Joint Secretary Haryana Chapter of Indian Fertility Society. Now I request chairperson to kindly initiate program with her talk on genitopelvic pain.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. So Dr. Ragini is going to, ma'am is going to speak, be the first speaker. And I invite Dr. Ragini, and she's a very well-known figure. I think everybody knows her, and she does not require any introduction here. So not wasting any more time, ma'am, please start the academic session.
Good afternoon to everyone. Very warm welcome to all who has joined. And thank you so much for sparing a time for my passion to learn and learn and learn. The whole life is a learning and nothing more than that. We are a student for whole life. With the blessing of Mahakal, I will start my presentation. Thank you, Jackson Paul, for making this possible to go, everyone. Thank you, IFS, Dr. Sonu and Dr. Priya, joining hand for this particular topic, which is not very, very known to all. And thank you all where I have taken materials, photographs, and the guidance. So genitopelvic pain or penetration disorder. In last few years, the name of all disorders are changed with the DSM-5 manual. Previously, all those pain disorders are having vague name. Now they all come under this umbrella of the genitopelvic pain or penetration disorder. As we all know by the previous two lectures, and just to refresh that female sexual dysfunction is a continuum of the psychosexual disorders centered on the sexual desire with interrelated problems of arousal, orgasm, and sexual pain that impairs the quality of life for many women. It afflicts many women, and especially with the endocrinology of the advancing years, it also plays a big role. Impact is often subtle, but for many, it is really make their life a real mishap. So it is a debilitating disease for many of them. We just all know that there are the four types of the disorders: hypoactive sexual desire disorder, sexual arousal disorder, orgasm disorder, and the sexual pain disorder. Many a time, because of one disorder, another disorder will increase. If a person is not aroused enough, he will not have a lubrication, and during the sex there is a pain. And that after a few intercourse, if the pain will take over as a central sensitization, and it will become also a pain disorder. So basically a continuum of the flow between all this disorder happen. And we should always remember the female sexual response cycle whenever we talk about anything about the female sexual function or dysfunction. There should be a desire, there should be an arousal, there should be an orgasm. maybe a person is not able to understand what is the orgasm, but it has to be there. Only then there's pleasure is there, and she will feel good about it, and a phase of resolution. Now, our all sexual dysfunction starts from the sexual normal response cycle. So here today we are taking sexual pain disorders, persistent or recurrent experience of pain during coitus. So by definition, genitopelvic pain penetration disorder involves involuntary contraction of the pelvic floor muscles when vaginal entry is attempted or completed. Either the main common thing is a vaginismus, which is today called levator ani syndrome. Then pain that occurs during deep penetration, maybe there's a dyspareunia because of some reason like endometriosis, prolapsed ovary, maybe some fibroid, maybe some PID, or maybe there's a localized in the vestibule, what we call as a provoked vestibulodynia. Then maybe this is the anxiety in the mind, maybe she's not comfortable, maybe she's having a wrong notion about the sex, religious belief, wrong teaching, or difficulty having intercourse, maybe they don't know how to do intercourse, or so many things. So women with genitopelvic pain penetration disorder have impaired arousal, orgasm, or both in many cases. Maybe it is not actually genitopelvic pain disorder, but it is a secondary disorder because of some other disorder. When we talk about the etiology, it is very, very common, specifically when we talk about the sexual dysfunction. One thing is something there is a physical, or a big chunk of those patients has having psychological problems also. So in the history, we have to see and focus. Welcome, Raman. Those psychological factors also. So when we talk about the superficial vulval pain, here provoked vestibulodynia is a real reason when we talk about the female sexual dysfunction, genitopelvic disorders. But other causes can be an underlying disease which is leading to this disorder, like genitourinary syndrome of the menopause, dermatological disorders of lichen sclerosis, vulvar dystrophies, congenital malformation like Ochigira syndrome, genital infection like herpes simplex, vaginitis, Bartholin gland abscess, maybe radiation fibrosis, because more and more women are today having a cancer, and we all know after radiation what happens to them. Post-surgical introital narrowing, many a time it is a debossed cosmetic surgery of vaginal tightening also, and recurrent tearing of the posterior forecheck, which is a very, very common occurrence in our practice. There's a permanent ulcer is formed in the posterior forecheck. Then coming to PVD or provoked vestibulodynia, it can be primary or secondary. Primary is present from the first experience with penetration, and secondary develops in the patient who have previously been able to have comfortable, pain-free penetration. Now, etiology is not really understood. Multiple factors can occur in the chronic pain syndromes also, like ICs, fibromyalgia, IBS, or there may be many multiple inflammatory or the immune responses. Now, deep dyspareunia, we all know, pelvic floor muscle hypertonicity. This is one thing which is not very clear to us gynecologists. We tell all patients to have a Kegel exercise, and many a time these patients has pelvic floor muscle hypertonicity, and they should release those muscles, not more contract it. So, and many uterine and ovarian disorders, as I have told you. Then a very big thing is sexual abuse. Many a time this sexual abuse in a childhood molestation by a very close relative, which really give a sense of loss in the mind, and those girls, they are really freezed up. So it is a part of the whole evaluation to take out this history and refer those patients to the proper person to relieve those trauma. Then term levator ani syndrome, is being increasingly used to replace vaginismus because symptoms of the vaginismus typically result in the levator ani muscle dysfunction. It combined with the pain and the emotional components, and maybe again primary or secondary, depending upon when it has been started. Women with the primary provoked vestibulodynia report that the pain occurred during their first experience. Many notice the pain first in the adolescent when they first try to put a tampon. They may report that they have never been able to have had comfortable with the sexual intercourse. And pain is described as a burning or a stabbing pain caused by the insertion of something into the vagina. And with the secondary PVD have similar symptoms, but previously they have a proper intercourse and where they haven't had any problem. Now this patient may develop a phobia-like avoidance of the penetration. They may have an intense fear or anxiety. Women anticipate that pain will recur during the penetration. Muscles will tighten, making attempts at sexual intercourse even more painful. And they can enjoy non-penetrative sexual activity. This is very important to know when we are distinguished whether it is really because of the genitopelvic penetration disorder or because of something else, because of some psychological block. Too inability to have sexual intercourse can strain a relationship. Women may feel ashamed, embarrassed, inadequate, or depressed, and it causes significant stress for women who want to become pregnant also. That's why it is so important for the infertility practice, and I have joined with the hand with the IFS Haryana because those women come to you, infertile IVF specialists, for not getting, becoming pregnant. And at this time, this evaluation is become very, very important. Diagnosis of this disorder is based on the symptom and result of the pelvic examination, and which can detect or rule out any other abnormality underlying. Examination, you have to start with the vulva, inspect it, skin, creases around it. The vulva we don't see. It is a forgotten organ in our armamentarium. And see the clitorid hood, urethral meatus, hymen, opening of the vestibular gland, or see the sign of the inflammation and the atrophy. Then you do the swab test or feather test. Moist cotton swab can be passed and map out the woman's pain. Manifest with the pain that is reproduced with the vestibule is the palpated. You have to see the entire vestibule from 1 to 11 degree, or sometime when the patient is very, very clear where she's getting, usually it is a posterior part, you can see there. And when you see the posterior part, it might be because of some pelvic floor dysfunction also. Digital examination, you can see for the pelvic floor hypertrophy, but sometimes it is not really possible to do any digital examination in this patient. Urethral bladder should also be palpated, speculum examination to see the cervix, bimanual examination, although most of the patient is really not ready to do for these examination. If they are ready, they are not coming to you for this disorder. They are already consummated or having intercourse. Levator ani syndrome, really you can't do anything. Clinician should explain first, to talk to the patient, explain them, and make them your confident, and maybe you are able to do a part of it. Diagnosis of GPPD requires the presence of at least one of the following criteria. These are the diagnostic criteria of the 5th edition of the DSM. Persistent or recurrent difficulties with the vaginal penetration, marked vulvovaginal or pelvic pain during vaginal intercourse or the attempt, marked fear or anxiety, marked tensing or tightening of the pelvic floor muscle during the vaginal penetration. And they should be present more or equal to 6 months, and there should be no other reason like marital relationship which is not good, or any other background reason. Treatment, when we talk about education, is very important. Psychological therapy, pelvic floor physical therapy really do wonders, and progressive desensitization. It also includes encouraging and teaching the couple to develop satisfying forms of the non-penetrative sex, so it will give more confidence to the girl that it is not something which is really going to do some harm, specifically the psychological trauma of girls, discussing psychological issues contributing to and caused by the chronic pain, treating the primary physical abnormality, treating coexisting pelvic muscle hypertrophy, and treating comorbid sexual interest in the arousal disorder. Topical estrogen, helpful in the in the GSMs, and also we know that the GSM there's intravaginal progesterone, SERM, like osmofin we can give. Then there's a data about the optimal treatment is really limited. First approach is always a reminder to practice good vulvar hygiene, wearing cotton underwear, washing in a mild soap, no douching, lubricant can be used during the sex, and a word about the pelvic physiotherapy. It can be as a muscle training, biofeedback, pelvic muscle relaxation, soft tissue mobilization, myofascial release, trigger point pressure, electrostimulation, bladder and bowel retraining, and therapeutic ultrasonography. Prescription, the non-prescription devices are available for the self-dilation, and in the presence of the therapist, it should be started. So I will take few slides about the focusing the vaginismus, or what we today called as a Levator-Ani syndrome, a sad story of a couple. It was first coined by the Marion Sims in the 1862, reflects a contraction of the circumvaginal musculature, might be emotional, like trauma of the sexual abuse, or there's a physical element also there. Half of the world of the female population suffer some kind of the sexual dysfunction, and it was found almost in the 7% of the women. You have to make a DT of the vaginal muscle squares of some reasons, superficial dyspareunia, vestibulodynia, or dyspareunia. The muscle who are culprit, we all know, is the muscle of the outer 1/3 of the vagina, and the pelvic muscles, circumvaginal and the paravaginal muscles, bulbocavernosus, Levator-Ani, and the picococcygeus. There's a vicious cycle. Women anticipate the pain, body automatically responds to it. There's a tightness, then the pain will reinforce, body reacts to it, and there's an avoidance of the intimacy, and it goes on. There is a hypertonic pelvic floor muscles, pain, anxiety, difficulty in penetration, and as I have told you, all those things like phobia, contractions are present. Primary, secondary, and maybe it is a global problem like unable to place anything in the vagina, or it is a situational, maybe only tampon, maybe only sex, or maybe sex with a particular partner. Now, superficial pain, maybe because of the lack of the sexual arousal, vulvovaginitis, dermatosis, or deep pain. History, we'll go in detail with the medical, psychosocial, sexual history, clear description of the pain, history of the sexual pain during intercourse. The examination, I have told you, you have to rule out everything first. Now, coming to the exact thing. You have to see the degree of the vaginal spasm and the degree of the fear, anxiety. You have to stratify what the woman is suffering. This is the scale where you grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5, you do that, able to relax for the pelvic examination, unable to relax, protect lift of the table, generalized retreat, or she's really become hyperventilating, collapsing situation, pulse rate is fast, maybe hysterical, wanting to jump. A few times, they really want to smash my face when they really extended their legs. And believe me, there is one for the patient, she is not suffering from anything, she is suffering from the Ochigira syndrome. So many things we can find. It's not only something like the only vaginismus, the pure vaginismus, whether it is a psychosocial, psychological, or a physical vaginismus, but the underlying structural defect also. So break the vicious cycle is our aim, replacing pain by the pleasure, spasm by the relaxation. The main thing, you should be non-judgmental. Patience is the mainstay of this practice. Warm, sympathetic attitude. And if you can't do, refer those patients who can do it. Maybe sexual therapist, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, or your own colleagues who are well-versed in it. Line of treatment, history, false beliefs, You have to sex education, you have to do control of muscles, you have to taught them systemic vaginal desensitization. Botulinum toxin is a new thing, and you can have other modalities like laser also. So to gain control over the muscles surrounding her introitus is the first thing when you do the pelvic exercises. She should learn what are the, identify the muscles, advise to sit on the toilet with her legs spread and focus there and see and starts and stop the flow of the urine and learn what the muscles are when you teach them the Kegel exercise. Kegel exercise is not the making the abdomen in and out like Baba Ramdev. So benefit of the Kegel exercise we all know, but when we have a real vaginismus, Kegel exercise is not going to give the really a good help. So we have dilators. She can start with by herself. Then we have Botox. I will take 2 or 3 slides on this. Basically, what it does, it really do a paralysis of the muscles, and it will really effective after the 3 to 7 days of the injection. Continue for the 3 to 4 months, and many a time it is only once you have to give. Then she has a pleasure, and she will relax, and she'll continue with the intercourse. It is not licensed. So you have to tell this patient it is a off-level treatment what you are doing. Take the consent, document it. These are the conditions which are really approved indications. Now this is my trolley. How we have to, what we should have, a syringe, a Botox injections, then the powder where we have made the solutions. And we have to keep while refrigerator, not in the fridge. In the fridge, not in the freezer. 0.9% saline. Use 22 gauge needle. Insert the needle. Slowly inject the saline, and gently mix the toxin with the saline by moving side to side, not shaking violently. And we have to push the take this solution, and these syringes are stored in a refrigerator. 2 to 8 degrees centigrade can be stored to 4 to 6 weeks, but it will the potency really decreased. Clear, colorless fluid and free of the particulate material. Technique, you have to give, I usually use only 100 unit. So 20, 20, 10, divide in the muscles, but I mostly focus on one muscle, and patient is discharged on the same day. You can do in your OPD with a in your minor OT with a little bit sedation also, but sometimes they really need the full anesthesia also. Avoid urethra and rectum to avoid the incontinence, but always tell the patient it can happen, but it will go in the 4 months. So pubococcygeus is the main muscles, and bigger muscles usually I focus there. This is the way how to give it. So single treatment is sufficient, and once vagina is stressed, you need not to go again. But yes, in the few cases, rarely you have to go, and the contraindication is the hypersensitivity to albumin. And if the patient is having any infection, bleeding, or she's not very sure of anything, like whether she's planning for a pregnancy, or she's always do after the menstruation. Don't try to do in a luteal phase. No major side effect except the fecal in the urinary incontinence. Rapid effect. Pardon? So 2 slides for vulvodynia. Most common cause of the pain. 1976, first time ISSVD, this is the International Society for the Study of the Disease, has made a first proper introduction of the vulvodynia with a proper new taxonomy where clear identifiable causes and potential associated factors was projected. Vulvar pain caused by a specific disorder is not a vulvodynia. It should be the 3-month duration, localized or generalized, provoked or mixed. Onset should be primary or secondary, and there will be temporal pattern like intermittent, persistent, constant, immediate or delayed. And if there's any specific disorder, you can treat those disorder. The potential factor associated with the vulvodynia may be genetics, maybe comorbidities, hormonal factor, musculoskeletal factor, neurological mechanism, or psychosocial factor. Then you have to see for the location, provocation, onset, and the temporal pattern, and make a chart, write down everything. So only then you can understand this very, very complex pain of the vulvodynia. It is a dysfunctional pain. It is not a neuropathic pain. And this is a maladaptive pain without any biological function, unlike inflammatory pain where you find some underlying disease. So it is as a dysfunctional pain based on the prior exclusion of the specific disorder responsible for the inflammatory or the neuropathic pain. First line treatment is always pelvic floor physical therapy, topical estrogen, lidocaine gels, and neuropathic pain like gabapentin. You can try tricyclic antidepressant and various topical compounds like gabapentin, amitriptyline also be given. As surgery is in a few cases, you can do the surgery of the vestibulectomy, but today with the role of the laser therapy has come up in a big way. Only with the 1 or 2 laser, although we give 4 or 5 sessions, with the 1 or 2 laser of the carbon dioxide laser therapy, the patient really respond very, very well, and you don't go for this vestibulectomy, which is a really very, very cumbersome operation. So in nutshell, it really make our life of a woman is devastating. There's a deleterious consequences, serious psychosocial consequences, dissatisfaction with the body and the low self-esteem, and it is a major health problem. Relationship between the genetic, inflammatory, infectious, hormonal is not been demonstrated. You can confuse them as a vulvodynia, but they are independent reason of the vulvar pain. And it is, the definition has really made a difference between two things. And the interest group state that the pain in the vulvodynia should not be considered a neuropathic pain. Refer to a certified sex therapist for the psychological therapy. CBT is important. These can overlap also. It is not a valid or reliable diagnostic criteria for the vaginismus. Clinical syndrome that consists of the overlapping, you have to find out those elements, and exploration of the phobia, sex education, control of the muscles, botulinum toxin, laser therapy, everything is really, really required. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an descriptive overview of this subject. And it's really very much appreciated that there should be a differentiation that you have already rightly told between vulvodynia and degenerative disorders, because we get many patients of vaginismus and we don't know that whether which type of vaginismus. Really great, evaluated everything in details. It was really very great. I was just like listening to you, and thank you very much for this important topic. So maybe invite you the next speaker, ma'am. Any questions? If there are, I think we'll take at the end. Okay, so we'll invite our next speaker, Dr. Raman. He also needs no introduction. He is the program coordinator of this series, and he is the director and chief urologist at Urocenter and main neurologist and andrologist practicing in Gurgaon. So he will be talking on the topic, which is really very important for male infertility and male sexual disorders, like it's an ejaculation. Over to you, Dr. Raman, and waiting for your descriptive talk.
Thank you, Dr. Priya. I hope I am quite audible and you can also see my presentation. I'll just be switching over to it. I hope you can see the slides. So thank you, Dr. Ragini, and thank you again, Jackson Park, for the opportunity. So we've been trying to cover most of the sexual disorders. So we've already talked about erectile dysfunction. We've talked about premature ejaculation. But what if, everything is happening right, but there's nothing coming out during intercourse? So that's a specific problem where either the patient does not ejaculate, or, he tries and it goes minutes and hours, but still he is not able to actually ultimately emit any sperm out. So delayed ejaculation and anejaculation, I'm combining the two topics together because they are very, very similar. So in this talk, we're going to learn about this particular device, which is in my hand. Now, this is a penile vibratory stimulator. So we'll know when to use it. We'll show you a live video of doing, not live actually, it's a recorded video, but done recently only. So I'll be showing you that particular procedure because we've all heard about it, but I think many gynecologists have never seen really a penile vibratory stimulator. And I don't know, Deepika ji, but because this video may have content which may be objectionable to Facebook, so be prepared to be blocked, in case. So I'll try and make it very brief in the end of the. Also, we will learn about, what happens in case you have a patient whom you have posted for a maybe an IVF, and then he suddenly doesn't ejaculate that particular day. So what should be the stepwise approach? So these are the bonus things that we will be discussing in this lecture. So before we talk about somebody not ejaculating, we should understand, what are the expectations from a man. So basically, when people come to me, they usually think that sexual activity has to last for hours and hours together. So Ragini, I think there are a lot of myths around, which also we have to bust in these series. So normally the sexual activity, the penetrative activity usually lasts for about 2 to 5 minutes. And if we talk about globally, it may range from 2 to say about 12 or 15 minutes. And if we talk about the average intravaginal ejaculation latency time, that's about 4 to 10 minutes. So anything above 2 minutes, you remember from the last talk, we had considered that as normal. Now, basically, we know that everything follows a bell-shaped curve in our human science. And any two standard deviation, left or right, they are both abnormal. So today we are talking about the right side of that curve, which is delaying ejaculation or ejaculation not happening at all. So ejaculation actually is a complex process. Now, just imagine that we have to understand this process. So first is that we have to have an erection. And this is a parasympathetically mediated thing. So once somebody has an auditory stimulus, visual stimulus, or tactile stimulation, then basically the person starts to create a fantasy. And then basically the signals, they get transferred from the parasympathetic supply to the penis, where basically the nerve endings, they will be on the arteries. Now there they will release the nitric oxide, the artery will dilate, blood will come into the spongiosum, and then it will collapse all the veins around so that the blood is not able to go back, and then you have an erection. Now when the sexual stimulation reaches a climax, which is a cerebral phenomena, as we have shown here that orgasm is a cerebral phenomena. During that time, basically at the peak of that climax, you will have a sympathetic stimulation, due to which there will be release of signals from either T10 and L2 level from the spinal column, which will lead to emission of the semen. Now this happens at the level of the epididymis, the myoepithelial cells of the epididymis, the seminal vesicles, the prostate. All of them basically will get stimulated to release whatever secretions they have inside them. And along with that, what is going to happen is that the bladder neck is going to get tight. So if we look at the diagram, we'll find that the bladder neck, basically, it collapses when the ejaculation happens. So it doesn't let the ejaculate enter the bladder. So that's very, very important. So after emission, there's a bladder neck closure, and subsequently there's an expulsion which happens from the ischiocavernosus and the bulbospongiosus muscle. So just like, Dr. Ragini's talk, I could really relate to today, because a lot of things like Kegel exercises, the nerves, the psychological aspect, they are all common to both the genital pain disorders as well as to anejaculation. So expulsion happens by those bulbocavernosus muscles, the ischiocavernosus muscles, which are going to contract again, and they're going to expel semen out. So it has to come with some force, basically. So that's the entire process, and a lot of neurotransmitters are involved in this, and cerebral phenomena are involved in this. Now, once we have somebody who says that, doctor, I don't have my semen coming out, or we were not having a baby, so I went to a fertility expert, and the fertility expert ordered for a semen report, and then I couldn't give any semen because I have never been able to give semen. And now then she said that go to Dr. Raman, maybe, or maybe go to any other andrologist. So first is then I have to see basically that, this is an anejaculation that we're dealing with, because it may be retrograde ejaculation, it may be aspermia, it may be ejaculatory anhedonia, which means that the patient, doesn't feel like ejaculating to give closure to intercourse. Or it may be an ejaculated dyssynergia, which means that he gets so much of pain while these muscles are contracting. There are myoepithelial cells, there's sclerosis, bulbospongosis. It may be painful. So that's why, you know, this talk does relate with the genital and the pelvic pain also. These can basically lead to some sort of a issue around. And, you know, the patient will not feel like ejaculating. He will feel that, you know, there's going to be pain. So let me stop here the entire stimulatory process, and whatever it is, at least sex has happened, my wife is satisfied. So these are some things which we have to differentiate from when we say that this patient has an ejaculation. So if you look at the definition of the third international consultation of sexual medicine, it has defined the delayed ejaculation and ejaculation as IELT threshold beyond 20-25 minutes of sexual activity, which also causes one, a bother. Secondly, basically 1% of men may have a lifelong PME, while about 5% may have an acquired delayed ejaculation. So this is the kind of statistics we have. So it's a very common thing. But you know, somewhere the people do manage to have their babies. I also don't know how, but it is a cause of concern. So what are the causes to around an ejaculation? One is that there can be some mental causes. The other is there can be some sort of an organic cause. Now the mental causes, they are basically around fear. So they have fear of ejaculating, fear of having a pregnancy, fear of causing pain to the partner. So all those kind of small fears, or maybe fears which are not sexually oriented, maybe other sort of fears also can also lead to an ejaculation or delayed ejaculation. The second is their orientation may be a problem. So they may not be doing well with the ladies. So they may not be heterosexual, but they may be homosexual. And those patients also have a tough time ejaculating inside a female partner, because their families have just tied the knots without thinking about, asking about, and now they are inside a relationship which they have to, you know, carry on their shoulders. Then there is a hostility. So common thing, Mia Bibi ki ladai, and then those kind of things, if they make a strong impression inside, and you know, that kind of a negative feeling towards the partner can lead to an ejaculation. Any OCD, basically, the patients have a genetic tendency to OCD. Those patients also, we have found that they are more commonly having an ejaculation. And then sometimes there's performance anxiety, and that anxiety, which I have seen as one of the very common factors when patients say that they cannot come inside. Then basically I do counsel them about performance anxiety, and I do prescribe many things which we will discuss about, of course. Another theory is that sometimes patient is not able to give himself. So that kind of a theory comes from our psychiatric colleagues and psychology colleagues, and they say that this is also something which can be a hindrance. Some patients, they have been so used to masturbation, so we call them autosexual, which means they don't need a partner at all to be satisfied sexually. So these kind of autosexual people also, they don't bother about ejaculating and completing the process. They would just be caring about, you know, satisfying themselves. Then we have religious reasons also. If somebody has got a great inbound sense that, you know, it is a wrong thing or something like that, then those things can play on the cerebral level, and they can lead to anorgasmic ejaculation, because orgasm happens from the cerebral level. And these kind of things, you know, they affect the cerebral things. Then a poor self-assertion, underconfidence. Maybe they have some unique masturbation techniques which they have become used to stimulate themselves. Now they can't follow it, so that becomes a problem. And then, as I also discussed, disparity with the fantasy. Sometimes, you know, people would want that their partner should do this. Only then they would be able to ejaculate, or they want as a couple to achieve some particular point where they are not able to go because of inhibitions of the female partner, or maybe the male side probably thinks too wild, which is not possible. So basically, the disparity with fantasy can lead to an ejaculation because they are expecting something. So the expectation management has to be proper. Some patient may have low libido, and then that again becomes a problem. And then depression, again a concern, or poor arousal because maybe they don't like the partner, or maybe there's certain bad odor, hair. All those small things can cause and become a problem leading to an ejaculation. Then thinking about organic causes. So as we've seen that as the age increases, basically we get patients who are not able to ejaculate. That's all neurologically bound. Maybe the reflexes, the latencies, they all increase. Then we have genetic factors. A lot of genes we have been able to identify which are associated with an ejaculation. So sexual problems, I always tell that in every seminar that they are real problems. We cannot shoo them away. We cannot just hide them under the banner of a taboo. they are real problems. They actually cause a lot of problem to that particular patient. Maybe for a patient with ED, it is as good as a penile attack. Basically, it would be as equivalent as a heart attack for him. So basically, we cannot say that this is not a problem or it's not a disease and it doesn't require the time. That disease particularly is also worthy of our time, and we have to look into it. So these are genuine problems. The patients have not made them up, but yes, they may be linked to a lot of psychological factors. Then again, congenital anatomical defects like posterior valves, Crohn belly syndrome, Mullerian problems, multiple sclerosis, exhaustrophy, all these kind of things, neurogenic causes like pelvic radiation, any surgery in the pelvis. So sometimes I do a robotic prostatectomy that may lead to some damage to the nerves, and we may have it something related to anejaculation. So the nerves which are supposed to go into those myoepithelial cells, they just become damaged and nothing comes out. So these kind of things are real problems. Then infections like urethritis and local infections, then prostatitis, they can also be causes of anejaculation because they elicit pain. And then patient stops himself at the point of climax because he wants to avoid the pain, but he has to have penetration for satisfying the partner. Then endocrine causes, of course, low testosterone that leads to low libido, hypothyroidism, hyperprolactinemia. These are all seen to be scientifically associated with anejaculation. And then lastly, we have drug induced. So there's a long list of drugs. Actually, it could cover the entire presentation, so I haven't put it up. But any drug, it has a potential to cause anejaculation because it is acting at the cerebral level. Now, I wanted to bring this busy slide here because it's a very important slide. And this comes from a very reliable paper on anejaculation. So basically, first and foremost, once we have a patient who is with anejaculation, we have to understand, is it really an anejaculation? And first and foremost, what we have to decide is this anejaculation happening because of orgasm not happening, which is called an orgasmic anejaculation, or it is happening because the orgasm is not happening, which is an orgasmic anejaculation. So if the orgasm is happening and the ejaculation is not happening, then we have to think about other causes which are beyond the brain. So they are something that has to do with nerves and stuff. If the patient is not having an orgasm itself, then it is something to do with the psychology, or maybe the patient hasn't experienced the orgasm or something on those lines. So we have to understand whether firstly, if there is a lack of orgasm also. Then we have to understand if the orgasm is there, then is there a possibility that these sperms may be actually going back into the bladder? So that's the first and most important differential diagnosis for anejaculation, which is retrograde ejaculation, which means that the semen is not coming from the front, but it's going back in the common passage through the ejaculate duct to the bladder mouth and then into the bladder, and then it is. So that's the other kind of a differential diagnosis that we have to make sure, and we'll talk about that also. Then we have to understand, so the history here for anejaculation has to be very, very intimate. So it has to be in a room which is locked, a room which is cozy, and it has to be in a relationship where the patient really trusts the doctor, and the patient and feels that doctor has all the time in the world to listen to him. And that's the biggest problem with dealing with sexual problems, because I think all the qualified doctors with a lot of degrees don't have one thing, which is the time to give to these problems. So you have to ask them, what is the duration of the thirsting before they suspend the intercourse? What are the reasons for suspending the intercourse? Is the patient getting fatigued? Maybe, he's come back from a busy day and usually his day is busy and he has no energy to do it. Or does he get a lot of loss of erection? Because ED could be a simple reason for an ejaculation. So he may be trying, he's not able to sustain because of ED. His blood flow in the penis is not good enough to continue with the sexual activity. He feels that, there will be no ejaculation happening, and then he basically suspends the intercourse. Or maybe the partner herself is asking the patient to stop, maybe because of pain or this. So these are all possible causes where, I will be referred the patient as with a diagnosis of anejaculation, whereas it may be a dyspareunia, as Dr. Ragini had elaborated upon. So also I want to understand from that patient if he is unable to advance his ejaculatory response, which means that he gets a feeling that he will ejaculate or he doesn't get a feeling in the first place. And then how bothered is he with all this particular condition? Has this happened first time? Has it happened earlier also? Does it happen every time that the patient does it? Does it happen with a particular partner? Can he masturbate and assist the ejaculatory process, or it's still not possible even with masturbation also? Is there any history of nocturnal emissions or morning erections? How are all those general sexual things? That also I need to understand. How well does the patient get his erection and sustain the erection? And how does the erection help in heightening the sexual arousal? These kind of things are also important. Does the patient feel that, there is inadequate friction fantasy? Maybe he's not able to create a fantasy in the first place, which will be able to give the orgasm to the patient. What have been his sexual growth like? When did he start masturbation? What are the habits to masturbate? Because we did talk about the fact that, if the patient has peculiar ways of masturbation and he's used to getting satisfied with only those ways, then a partner can't help that particular patient. And then we also talk about the sexual history, abuse history, neurological history, religious beliefs, psychiatric disorders, medications that he's taking on, any other local pathologies that could be leading to anejaculation. Now, when I examine this patient, usually I want to see if there are any local causes of pain and stuff. And I want to make sure that, there's no arthritis, there's no epididymitis, and everything else looks good. There's good androgenization, the testosterone level most likely would be good if the ejaculation, if the androgenization is normal, the secondary sexual characters are normal. Then I want to do some focused neurological examination where I want to check the cremastic reflux, the bulbocavernous reflux, the anal reflex. I want to see the sensations in the areas of the S234 and the T11 to L2 level. I want to just do a focused neurological examination there to make sure that, we're not dealing with something neurological. And then maybe I would want to first and foremost make sure that I'm not dealing with retrograde ejaculation. That's a different ballgame altogether. So I want to ask the patient to first masturbate and then give his urine sample in the lab. Now there, if my lab technician finds that there are any sperms present, usually multiple sperms present, then I would label this patient as having retrograde ejaculation. And then my line of treatment would be to give sympathomimetics to the patient and try if he can, improve the tone of his bladder neck and then be able to have an antegrade ejaculation rather than a retrograde ejaculation. I also want to check his urine, his hormonal levels, and sometimes I have to look at a TRUS or transrectal ultrasound where I want to make sure there are no anomalies. So the seminal vesicle agenesis, ejaculatory duct, sometimes maybe agenetic, the vas basically may be absent. There would be cysts in the prostate which may be compressing on the ejaculatory duct. So all these kind of things I can get to know with imaging, maybe with the help of an ultrasound, and sometimes even a CT may be required to assess that pelvic area better. So after I have done all this, my goal is to first see whether the patient is having an orgasm or not having an orgasm. And we've already ruled out retrograde ejaculation here because we've done that urine analysis after masturbatory urine sampling. So once I've got an idea that it's not retrograde ejaculation, I will like to dwell deeper into the history. I want to ask him, when he masturbates, does he actually get an orgasm ever? Has he really experienced an orgasm in the first place? Because I am going to tell you the story of a patient who owns a very big store in our city, and he actually had an orgasmic ejaculation, which means that he never experienced an orgasm unless we use this device to make him experience an orgasm. And then on that day itself, he understood that what an orgasm feels like. Many people would not be as lucky as the rest of our male members to be able to experience an orgasm. And I know that many women, they would not have experienced an orgasm. I do appreciate that. But for men, it is very, very uncommon to not experience an orgasm. But yes, there are few gentlemen who don't, and we have to make them understand what an orgasm is in the first place. So maybe when he grew up, maybe when he self-stimulated, did he ever have an orgasm? That's very, very important for me to understand. And many patients would say that, no, yes, I did experience an orgasm, but in fact, they don't even understand what an orgasm is. So they have to be told how it feels, which is very, very difficult to convey. But the best way to convey would, of course, be to make it happen for them, and then they could know. The next thing is, I want to make sure that whether this is a primary anejaculation. It has never happened, or it is used to happen earlier. Now it's not happening, because again the therapy line changes absolutely when it's a secondary reason, because then we can find out the reason, we can work on it, we can involve a lot of multidisciplinary teams, psychologists, psychiatrists, and neurologists also sometimes, and work on it. I have to understand whether it's a particular situation where the patient has not ejaculated. Maybe when he was asked to deposit a sample in the IVF lab, and he had a white coat thing around it, or has it been happening every time? And then what is the severity of it? Is it just delayed? Is it an ejaculation? So all these kind of things I want to know. So retrograde ejaculation we've already discussed while we talked about, but we have not discussed one important aspect of this, that in case it is happening, what has to be done? Because now we'll be coming on to the management of these situations. So in case there's a retrograde ejaculation, there are two things. One is that, do we want to correct it, or are we just caring about the sperms? You know, that once the sperms are there, I don't have to do anything with the rest of the problem. Now, in case we are concerned about correcting the retrograde ejaculation, then we have to know the cause of it. If it's a surgery which has been done, maybe a TURP or a pelvic, maybe a rectal surgery for prolapse, a sacral fixation of the rectum, or a RPLND, or maybe some sort of a pelvic lymph node dissection where we have probably damaged the nerves, then I'm sorry for the patient, because we can't do much for those patients anymore. But in case, you know, we feel that it's not such an organic cause, we have not directly caused any damage, then we can try with something which we call as sympathomimetics, wherein typically what I give is a common cold medicine for 3 to 5 days to understand how things are going, and then continue for about 2 to 4 weeks. Or maybe imipramine. Now, imipramine is falling short in the market. I'm not getting it lately, but imipramine is one of my favorite drugs that I would probably want to give the patient, and see after a couple of weeks if he is able to produce more volume or produce any volume of semen, in case it is a retrograde ejaculation, of course. But in case I'm not concerned about just fixing his problem, but I'm just concerned about giving him a baby because my gynecology friends have, you know, trusted me with it, then probably what you all also would know is that we would want to do it in a controlled environment, where first we will ask him to pass the urine, then we ask him to have the sexual activity or basically self-stimulate, and then we can instill sperm media inside the bladder, or maybe backup solution inside the bladder. This all has to be done after the patient has been on alkalizers, systemic alkylation and local alkylation for about at least 3 to 4 days, preferably. And then we collect whatever comes in the catheter, and then we prepare sperms out of it. And depending on the number, I would ask this question from you all, if you've ever been able to do an IUI with it, because I don't know much about, I've not seen many people responding with a yes for IUI, but yes, IVF-ICSI, I know they have been done successfully with this approach. We've also tried to do some experiments around it. For example, I've tried to put in a catheter, put it on traction, ask the patient to masturbate with it, and able to achieve antegrade sample at least, but it had no sperms, unfortunately. So we've tried it in about 5-6 patients, have got success in one. But I'm looking at working again on this method further, maybe as a useful way to get through. Now, these are some of the other medicines that we would probably like to give in this situation of delayed ejaculation, because medical therapy is what the patient is expecting from me. He doesn't want probably something invasive in the first visit. So depending on the cause, the medicines are there. I can give testosterone or something to raise testosterone like SERMs in case there's a hypogonadism. If there's hyperprolactinemia, then cabergoline. If there are psychological issues, then bupropion, amantadine, cyproheptadine, midodrine, imipramine is one of my favorites. Of course, pseudoephedrine if I'm thinking of retrograde ejaculation, and yohimbine, and oxytocin, and a few other things which some cats which I may not want to let out of the bag because they are very, very rare. So we don't want to waste time. But coming on to this particular thing where, what is the approach like when I'm dealing with an anorgasmic ejaculation? First is that I have to think about a neurobiological cause, ejaculatory duct obstruction. I do a digital rectal examination, maybe a truss ultrasound, sometimes an endoscopy, and then confirm with a penile vibratory stimulation, which is PVS. And PVS typically works for patients where we have a complete spinal cord injury. If it's an incomplete injury, then what happens is that when you elicit the reflex, then the brain, the cortical centers, they try to inhibit that reflex. So sometimes you're not able to achieve an ejaculation. So basically, PVS only works in patients where there's a complete spinal cord injury, in case it's neurological, or if it is just an orgasmic and ejaculation and he's never had an orgasm, then we can elicit an orgasm and make him ejaculate. So this is something that you need to understand, that PVS has limitations, but it still works in a lot of patients. And those in which it doesn't work, they need to go for an electroejaculator, like we use for bulls to get the semen samples for the insemination of cows. So it's something based on those principles. It's called Segal's electroejaculator. But then this is the last step. It can work in any sort of a spinal cord injury patient with an amplitude. We start at 2.5 at 100 Hertz. So that's the story like. And now I want to kind of close the talk with that particular small video. So I'll just put that video separately. Meanwhile, you can start thinking about questions that you would want to discuss about. And let me share my screen.
There's no question in the box at least.
Yeah,
So
it was such an elaborate and such a nice presentation, Dr. Raman. And as before, we've heard you on premature ejaculation and all. So
ma'am, this is a video of how we actually do the PVS, because I know that many of us have heard about it, not seen it happening. So I've just put the PVS, the vibration device. This is the Reflexonic Viber Erect from the US. It's one of the patented ways to do it. And now we will be able to see as we stimulate, the penis will start getting erect. So we start with the lowest frequency. So here we have different frequencies that we can select. We can select a dorsal pad or a ventral pad or both also, depending on the amount of stimulation required. We pinch the penis in between the prong, and particularly the frenulum is the area where we have to stimulate. Now we will find the video, the penis is eventually becoming erect, as we can see, it's slowly and slowly rising. And this patient has never had an orgasm. Okay, he's tried intercourse multiple times. They have had penetrative intercourse, but he didn't know what an orgasm was like until this particular moment that we will all witness. So the penis has now become erect. We can see that the erection arc is preserved, and we will also find that the precum, the glands, secretion from the glands of litter and all, they have started coming. And we keep usually stimulating initially for 2 minutes, then we give in a break, and then we do again for 5 to 6 minutes at the second aspect. And sometimes rarely, when the patient feels that there was some inadequacy, then we can repeat it for the next 10 minutes, but otherwise we don't. And as we can see now, the semen has come out. Now this is the lying down position in which we do it for the ease first once we are testing. When we have to collect the semen sample, so we can all see that the semen has started to come out for this particular patient. Now we also collected the semen for this patient in the second instance, because he was told how the orgasm is supposed to be, and he tried to do it, but he could not elicit the orgasm without the PVS. So we, in the second instance, collected his semen, and there were 104 million sperms per ml. Patient was, of course, quite happy that at least he can be a father, because his concerns were not just about ejaculating, but also about being a dad in the end. So that's all successful ejaculation at the end of the talk.
So Raman, is this device easily available, like people have it, the urologist, or it's?
So basically, I don't know if any other urologist has it in Gurgaon. In Delhi, of course, all the reputed andrologists have it. But there are many, you can say, versions of this. So you can use a massager and all those, but they are not very professional to work with. So if they fail, you cannot say that you've tried your best. But this device particularly was for 24K. 24,000 is just for this kind of a massager, you can say. But I think a lot of fertility centers do have it, because they often, get stuck with patients who are not able to deposit their samples in the end. And unethically, we would have to do a TISA. Just for personal relations to be maintained.
Yeah, exactly. So now we know where to send the patient if we are stuck with the.
Most welcome. Otherwise, you can always take this vibrator on a friendly note from me and serve your patient well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was such a nice talk, and the video was really an eye opener, and how we can go about with these patients, and even in IVF centers, like you said, without making them undergo a testicular aspiration or biopsy. So thank you so much. And now we have our next speaker.
I think it's a wonderful presentation, Raman, and it's an eye-opener. I think most of the gynecologists.
Yeah, exactly.
My pleasure, ma'am. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And even the previous ones, the premature ejaculation, and they've been very elaborate and excellent talks.
Actually, Raman is not a urologist only, he's an andrologist. That's make a big difference. A person has an interest in the maternal male health. He always said, ma'am, I'm a male health specialist like you are a female health specialist. So it's a lots of difference.
Yeah, because if we send our patients to a urologist, they don't treat them like we want them to.
Yeah, they don't treat them properly.
Yeah. And what Raman said, that a very patient hearing and patient history taking, that is also very important for that.
I appreciate.
Yes.
I appreciate it, and of course, I'll try my best to take.
Raman, there is a question: role of oxytocin. गया क्या उसका फिर से?
हाँ जी, लग रहा है वो अटक गया. We can take the question later.
Yeah, afterwards. Raman?
Yes.
There's a question, role of oxytocin in ejaculation.
So ma'am, basically, since it's a cerebral phenomena, so oxytocin, there are many studies around it that oxytocin and prolactin both, they have something to do with the orgasmic cycle up there. So in patients with anejaculation, where we have an anorgasmic anejaculation, some people have tried to supplement it, and many studies are there around checking the levels of oxytocin. They have probably found it to be a little off the charts. Even low as well as high oxytocin can both lead to this kind of a situation. But of course, there's no medication around it yet, because this is just us. It's a multifactorial etiology, and we've just found an association. So it could be just something which is a part of it and may require correction, not just whole soul responsible for it.
Okay, thank you so much, Raman. Now coming to our next speaker then, Dr. Priya Jaiswal. So Dr. Supriya Jaiswal, she is the Secretary of Patna Obstetrics and Gynae Society and Chief Consultant at SM Hospital, Patna. She's the East Zone Coordinator for Adolescent Health Committee, FOGSI, and a member of Adolescent Health Committee, member of ISAR, IAGE, FOGSI, and trained in colposcopy, awarded Dr. MP John and Dr. Murthy Award for Best Short Paper in Obstetrics, and a recipient of numerous awards and certificates. And she has a special interest in high-risk pregnancy and preventive oncology. So over to Dr. Supriya Jaiswal for a talk on adolescent and sexuality, which is a very important topic. Yeah, Dr. Supriya.
Yeah. Thank you, madam. One second. Thank you, madam. Thank you. And a very good evening to all of you. I bring greetings to you from Patna and Patna OBGYN Society. So I thank the Indian Association of Cosmetic Dermatology and Gynecology and Aesthetic Health Committee, Indian Menopause Society, along with IFS Haryana chapter for giving me this opportunity to speak on such an important subject that is very close to my heart, that adolescent sexuality. Especially thank Dr. Ragini Agarwal, who is the program director, and Dr. Sonu, who's the Madam Dr. Sonu, who's the chairperson, and I would thank the whole team for giving me this opportunity. So with this, I start my presentation. So I am going to talk about adolescent sexuality. So adolescence is the age from 10 to 19 years, the transition between childhood and adulthood. It is a stressful period of life characterized by physical, mental, emotional, and behavioral changes. During this period, the body develops in size, shape, reproductive capabilities. Mind becomes capable of more abstract thinking. Now, social relationships move forward, being more focused, being centered on the family based to a wider horizon that in which peers and other adults come to play significant roles in the adolescent's life. It was also a time when new skills and knowledge are acquired and new attitudes are formed. So, adolescents have to cope not only with their physical appearance, but also with associated emotional changes and emerging the compelling sex urges. Body changes cause emotional stress and strains, as well as abrupt and rapid mood swings. Now, hormonal changes are likely to result in thoughts pertaining to sex, irritability, restlessness, anger, and tension. So, sexual attraction leads to a desire to mix freely and interact with each other. This is how the adolescents feel. Usually, the adolescents' characteristics are they are mostly aggressive. We have made a few of their attitudes like aggressive, anemic. Usually, they go for abortion. These are the things they face day to day life: dynamic, overconfident, overindulging, obese. They are loud, but they're very lonely, and lack of information bothers them a lot. They are enthusiastic, they are explorative and experimental. They are also social, sexual, and spiritual, courageous, cheerful, and they are really concerned for everything. They have got emotional upsets, they're eager and emulating, nervous, never say no to peers. This is very important about them, the adolescents. They are temperamental, they also face this teenage pregnancy problems. So, adolescents, India is one of the most populous countries in the world. Adolescents constitute about one-fifth of India's population. Young people constitute about one-third of the total population. So, in absolute number, as per 2011 census, there were 253 million adolescents in India. So, adolescence is characterized by conflicts of values. Then there are emotional stress and readiness to extreme attitudes, which invariably leads to several psychological problems of adolescence. So, more than 1 in 10 children in India are teenagers or currently undergoing puberty. Compared to India, youth in many developed countries has greater knowledge of contraception, birth control, and lesser prevalence of teenage pregnancy. So, greater knowledge about sexuality is one possible solution for this unmet reproductive health need of adolescents in India. So here comes along with the psychological changes which are normal for this age are maturation. So they face the mental, intellectual, and emotional maturation. There's a tendency to be independent like an adult. They want independence. They start distancing themselves from the adult world. They shift from parents to their peers. Identity is very important for them. They struggle to define themselves. The gender role identity, positive body image, sense of esteem, and competence. So, intimacy. Now, they special interest in the opposite sex is very natural. They find it difficult to distinguish between infatuation and love with or without sexual orientation. So peer group dependence is of utmost importance. So they prefer the company of their friends from gender specific peer groups. Coming to intellect, conceptual thinking, logical and deductive reasoning are the main things they undergo. Adolescents have unmet needs in many areas regarding nutrition, sexuality, reproductive health, managing emotions and stress, mental health. Mental health is a big issue with the adolescents, then substance abuse. They need to be empowered with correct age appropriate and current informations and skills in these areas. Now, sexuality behavior of adolescents in most cases are influenced by cultural norms. There are many cultural myths and ifs and buts. So these influence their sexuality behavior. Television shows and movies, sexual orientation, then internet. Teenagers are at risk from this sort of mass market encouragements. Now, in adolescence and internet, today is the world of online classes, online everything. So more indulgence in the internet and online things are very prevalent these days. During this transition, adolescents experience rapidly changing lifestyle, behavior, growth and development, and exposure to internet and mass media. With rapidly changing lifestyle and exposure to internet and mass media, sexual behavior of adolescent students is also changing. These factors may have considerable effect on lifestyle and sexual behavior of adolescent students. Risky sexual behaviors and lack of knowledge on sexuality related topics are among the leading problems most associated with mortality, morbidity, and social ailments in adolescent group. So, among Indian girls, misconception about sex, sexuality, and sexual health. Only 40% of sexually active girls were aware that condoms could help prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS and reduce the likelihood of pregnancy. And only 10.5% used condoms during the last time they had intercourse. So, adolescents who start having sex early are more likely to have sex with high risk partners, multiple partners. They go for less likely to use condoms. Contraceptive usage is also likely to be low because they are unaware of many safe contraceptive methods. Consequences of unsafe sexual behavior among adolescents is also very prevalent. Early pregnancy and parenthood. So higher percentage of low birth weight babies and increased infant morbidity and mortality is seen. Abortions and its related complications that is really very deadly sometimes. RTI, STIs including HIV, AIDS are also prevalent. Now, emotional impact, the guilt, the stress, and the anxiety leads to suicide because when they indulge themselves in wrong practices due to unawareness, it results in all this emotional impact. The social impact is the stigma, especially if she is unmarried. Economical impact is hindrance to academic and career progression. So economic, social, and emotional impact may be more in cases of adolescents, even if it is safe sex. They are not mature enough to handle these consequences. Negative impact leads to adolescents can face potentially serious physical, social, and economic consequences from unprotected sexual relationship, such as unintended and too early pregnancy and childbirth, unsafe abortions and STIs, including HIV. They cut short education and job opportunities, negativity. This affects social and cultural development, especially of adolescent girls. For boys too, early fatherhood can disrupt educational plans and increase economic responsibilities. So the lack of accurate information regarding sexual anatomy and physiology may lead to sexual ill health in the adolescents. They are ignorant about sexuality largely because they have a negative emotional attitude towards sex organs and matters related to sexuality. It is not uncommon for adolescents to perceive their sexual organs as dirty and to refrain from even looking at them. Innumerable myths attached to the organs available from peers, unscientific literatures are circulated among them. These may lead to irreparable harm later in their lives. So the peer pressure, this is very important. Peer plays a large role in the social and emotional development of children and adolescents. It is natural, healthy, and important for children to have and rely on friends as they grow and mature. Peers can be positive and supportive. Peers can also have a negative influence. They can encourage each other to skip classes, steal, cheat, use drugs or alcohol, share inappropriate material online, or become involved in other risky behaviors. So, tips for parents to help your child deal with peer pressure. So, encourage open and honest communication. This is for the parents. Teach your child to be assertive and to resist getting involved in dangerous or inappropriate situations or activities. Get to know how your child interacts with friends and others online. Communicate openly about safe internet and social media use. Help your child develop self-confidence. Develop backup plans to help kids get out of uncomfortable or dangerous situations. So there was an article that was originally printed in a book in a media, Sexual Behavior of Adolescent Students in Chandigarh, and their perceptions regarding family life education. They had were facing many reproductive health problems such as sexual worries, unprotected sexual activities, lack of knowledge regarding contraception, etc. They feel need of imparting this in school curriculum activities through health staff, that sexual education should be included as a part of school curriculum. Health facilities should be made more adolescent friendly. What happens when we stigmatize uh, adolescents about sexuality? So vulnerability to sexual violence. So 28% of female youth have experienced physical or sexual violence. A study on child abuse in India conducted by the Ministry of Women and Child Development reports that 53% of boys and 47% of girls surveyed faced some form of sexual abuse in their lives. So prevalence of STDs are there. Youth account for a high proportion of new STD infections. Nearly 2/5 of new HIV infections are reported among people below 25 years of age. So low age of marriage, 1 in every 5 women aged 15 to 17 years is married, and slightly more than half of women were of age 15 to 24 years who were married. High maternal mortality leads because of this early marriage. Early marriage leads to early childbearing, which puts both mother and child at high risk of mortality. Complications during pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death for 15 to 19-year-old girls globally. So early childbirth, it shows that 1/6 of 19-year-olds give birth or become pregnant, and half of India's total fertility rate is among those aged 15 to 24 years. At least 10 million unintended pregnancies occur each year among adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 years in the developing world. So this is just data. PCMA have been filed by parents of girls against a partner in case of self-arranged marriages. So one of the major challenges that comprehensive sexuality education faces in India is the lack of political will to support its provision. Largely, individual politicians and political parties do not consider sexuality education as an important issue to be discussed and introduced within the school curriculum. These are the key challenges: and cultural conservatism regarding adolescent sexuality, misconception about this content, remove sex education from schools, like people think it is wrong to have the sex education in schools. So it's famously well said by Benjamin Spock, sex education, including its spiritual aspects, should be part of a broad health and moral education from kindergarten through grade 12, ideally carried out harmoniously by parents and teachers. So school children will be taught safe use of internet and social media, reproductive health, prevention of HIV and gender stereotypes under the new health and wellness curriculum developed by the Narendra Modi-led government. It was recently introduced. So age-appropriate health promotion were there. In the primary school, you need to see the growth and health development. Middle school, you need to see the pubertal and related changes of the adolescents. Prevention of substance abuse, HIV, AIDS training. Then high school, you need to deal them with sexual and reproductive health. You have to make your adolescents know everything. We need to build the core assets of adolescents so that they can take control of their own lives. So competence, abilities to do specific things, build confidence, positive sense of self-worth in the adolescents, connection, that is positive bonds with people and institutions, character, sense of right and wrong. They should know what is right and wrong, and they should know how to respect for standards of right behavior. Caring, that is sense of sympathy and empathy for others. Then to grow and develop in good health, adolescents need information and skill. Information and skill, they are still developing. Safe and supportive environment. They live in an adult world. Health and counseling services. They need a safety net. ACOG committee opinion was, the recommendations and conclusions were The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, they said, regardless of patient's age or previous sexual activity, the obstetrician gynecologist routinely should address her contraceptive needs, expectations, and concerns. Do not ask them whether they are having a relationship or not. It's okay. Make them aware about all these things, the contraceptives that are available for the adolescents, and to have a safe sex practices. Statutes on the rights of minor to consent to healthcare services vary by state, and obstetrician gynecology should be familiar with the regulations that apply to their practice. Emergency contraception routinely should be included in discussion about contraception, including access issues. The American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists recommend that obstetrician gynecologists write advance prescriptions for oral emergency contraception for their patients. Then LARC, that is LARC, long-acting reversible contraceptive, and other things should be made available to the adolescents. They should know all the methods. They are excellent contraceptive choices for the adolescents. Discussion about contraception should begin with information on the most effective methods first. So the obstetrician gynecology should be aware of and be prepared to address the most common misperceptions about contraceptive methods in a way that is age appropriate and compatible with the patient's health literacy. So these are the other guidelines that should be given to the adolescents so that they can be aware of all the contraceptives that are there. How should we support adolescent sexuality? There should be an access to comprehensive sexuality education, including lessons on consent, personal space, puberty, sexuality, STDs, STIs, safe abortion, etc. Now, access to youth-friendly services, counselors, STI prevention, testing, and management services, access to contraception and safe abortion providers, empowering young people to know their rights, including the right to delay marriage, refuse sexual advances, and accessing contraception, etc. So destigmatize adolescent sexuality. Young people have the right to be aware about their sexuality and empowered to make responsible decisions about their sexual health. So to conclude, understanding the sexuality development of adolescent is of utmost importance. Without this understanding, one cannot move forward for clinical or educational intervention. Understanding the factors influencing sexuality is also useful for intervention. At the same time, understanding adolescent sexuality will also help parents to understand the difficulties of their children better and will help them to guide their children in the crossroads of adolescence.
Thank you, Dr. Supriya, for such a elaborative talk on this sensitive, much needed topic for discussion. And yes, it's our right to impart right sexual education to all the youths, and it's the informed choice which helps us is now, making decisions in the current society. So it is really a very nice topic, and you have detailed, elaborated everything about the adolescent sexuality.
Thank you.
So with this, I think we are ending this session. And thank you, Dr. Ragini ma'am, for such a good initiative of this human sexuality. And we will really appreciate each and every episode is coming up with a new topics, which is imparting light on each and every hidden topic of this human sexuality. It's really a great tool that you have started this series, and we are really accomplished to be a part of this program. Thank you, ma'am. And I just want to invite you to conclude the session with a thank you note.
Thank you, Priya. And Supriya, it's a wonderful topic. And the way you have presented your slides, everything is really great. And you have shown the ACOG committee bulletin also. But one thing I want to share with everyone, that in our country, you can do only contraception counseling. You cannot advise any contraception to a person less than 18. This is something called Pascola, which we should understand. Even with the consensual sex between two young adolescents, if they are less than 18 years, it will considered rape. So accepting that you are giving a contraception advice in writing or a contraceptive agent to bought from the market to any of the adolescent is considered a illegal activity. So it's a very big dilemma with all of us, what to do and what not to do. At one side, we all know that most of the adolescents today are having sex, or they can land up with the sex, and we cannot prevent it. Before, we cannot dem a contraceptive agent and say, start taking this thing. I think in future, many societies are working towards this. Maybe we will have some stay from the government in form of this contradictory PASCO law. So that's the only thing. And Raman, anything you want to speak, comment from your side on the sexuality as such?
I am also learning a lot in this series, and I'm also hopeful that everybody who is a part of the series is progressing when it comes to understanding human sexuality as the goal is. But I would really appreciate if people can let us know their feedbacks, all the participants. I see that the numbers are increasing of the participants, and that's a big motivation in itself.
Yeah, I too observed that today.
Them to know that we are all faculty, they are always there ready to help with any questions, concerns, and all the delegates, they can feel free to write into us anytime.
Yeah, actually the topics are very interesting. So I think, ma'am, that's why the participation and all the attendees, they are also quite stuck with our thing that again and again they keep on for all the series. More people are joining in now. So
even I was not trying to log it out. In spite of the work, I'm just making the audio on because it's such an interesting topics that we normally don't discuss and we don't come across. So it's really a great initiative, ma'am. And it's really the selection of topics are really very good.
Yeah, and it is actually encompassing all the age groups also. Like today we had this topic on adolescent and sexuality. It is a very important topic, and mostly children or grandchildren of all the doctors are also in that age group. So I think we are learning more for our children also. Yeah.
And thank you, madam, for giving me this adolescent topic, because it's very close to my heart. And I usually meet so many adolescent girls in my clinic. So I love to counsel them. I love to, and I come to know from them new things. Like they are very free now these days. So we have to learn lots about this topic. Thank you, madam.
So I think we should say bye-bye and over to Deepika. And thank you, viewers, to be with us till end. Thank you so much. Again, join on 28th October.
So now Jackson Pal would like to present to you Lycored soft gels. Lycored soft gels improve the erectile function. The lycopene in Lycored improves the endothelial nitric oxide, improves low-grade inflammation, improves oxidative burden of ischemic erectile tissue, and reduces the oxidative stress, thus improving erectile function. So in erectile dysfunction, Lycored protects NO, nitric oxide bioavailability, preserves the endothelium, and also the mitochondrial structural integrity. The most trusted form of estrogen is our micronized Endonorm EV2 estradiol valerate 2 mg tablets. And we also have Endorec 2 mg tablets of Dynogest for medical management of endometriosis. So my teammate, Mr. Amit Saxena, joins me to thank all the respected faculty and all the attendees with us today. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.